لا يحل للجنب دخول المسجد ولا قراءة القرآن إلا الآية ونحوها للتعوذ ونحوه ولا يجوز لمن لا يقدر على الماء البارد أن يأتي زوجته حتى يعد الآلة إلا أن يحتلم فلا شيء عليه. It is not permissible for a person in a state of major ritual impurity to enter a masjid. So if a place is purchased by the Muslims and dedicated as a masjid, or it's built as a masjid, if it's considered a masjid, then it's not permissible for a person to be in that area while in a state of janaba, or for a woman that's in a state of hayd, it's not permissible for her to be in a state of in the masjid. Nor recite Quran, with the exception of an ayah or two or its like, or two for seeking refuge or something similar. So for a person in a state of janaba, it is not permissible for them to recite the Quran until they do the ghusl, the complete body wash. And with the exception of an ayah or its like. If they're reciting an ayah for seeking refuge or something similar. If a person is going to recite an ayah or two or a short section of a surah for protection against the shaitan or protection before going to sleep, then it's permissible. So for example, if a person is in a state of janaba and they're not going to do their ghusl until later on in the night, but they want to read Ayatul Kursi before going to sleep, then that's permissible. And even if it goes up to an entire surah, such as Surah al-Jinn, they want to recite it before going to sleep, then that would be considered short enough for them to be able to recite it. But anything longer than that would not be permissible. And he says here, for seeking refuge from the shaitan or from evil before going to sleep or otherwise, or something similar, such as if they see something haram and they're mentioning the hukum, the judgment of that thing to a person, and they want to mention the ayah of the Quran, but they're in a state of janaba. For them, it's permissible to them to mention a few ayahs to mention that hukum. It is also not permissible for the one who is unable to bear cold water to lay with his wife unless he has prepared the necessary means to heat the water. So if a person knows that he needs warm water to do ghusl, he's not able to use cold water. If he uses cold water, he's going to get sick. So he knows that if he gets in a state of janaba and he needs to do ghusl and he cannot find warm water, then he's going to have to do tayammum, the dry earth, attaining purity through using earth. Then for that person, it's not permissible for him to lay with his wife, meaning to put himself in a state of janaba until he gets the necessary means to heat the water. So in some areas, a person does not have direct access to hot water. Like in Mauritania, if you're in the Badia, or even if you're in the city, there's no running hot water. So in the Badia, in the countryside, there's no hot water and there's no running water. So you would have to take water, if you want hot water, to get coals, light a fire, heat it up using a steel kettle, and then you would have hot water. So if a person is in that state, or if he needs to turn on the hot water heater to get hot water, then he cannot put himself in that state of janaba until he knows that he has the necessary means to take him out of it by having the hot water. In the text he says, لا يحل, it's not permissible, but what is actually meant is that it's not haram for him to do that, it's makruh. So it's disliked for him to do something like lay with his wife and take himself out of a state, put himself in a state of janaba, if he has not provided the necessary means to get out of that state. So here when it says it's not permissible, it means that it's makruh or disliked. Should he have a wet dream? There's obviously no blame in it. If a person during the course of the night has a wet dream and an ejaculation of fluid, and now he's in a state of janaba, but he does not have the necessary means to heat up water, and he cannot take a ghusl because he cannot stand cold water because it will make him sick, then in that case there's obviously no blame in that because he did not have control over it. فصل في التيمم ويتيمم المسافر في غير معصية والمريض لفريضة أو نافلة ويتيمم الحاضر الصحيح للفرائض إذا خاف خروج وقتها ولا يتيمم الحاضر الصحيح لنافلة ولا جمعة ولا جنازة إلا إذا تعينت عليه الجنازة. This is the chapter considering tayammum. And tayammum is getting ready for prayer or for tawaf or for things that are an obligation, and they do not have water or they cannot use water, so they use tayammum. He says the traveler who is not disobeying Allah in his journey may perform tayammum. If a person is on a travel and he is not disobeying Allah in his journey, then he may perform tayammum for nafilah prayers. And the infirm, the sick, may also perform tayammum for both obligations and nafilah prayers. So if a traveler is not disobeying Allah in his journey, he's on a recommended journey, or he's on a obligatory journey, an obligatory journey such as going to Hajj, or going to seek knowledge, or going to take care of obligatory needs of the Muslims. If he's on that journey, an obligatory journey, or on a recommended journey, such as going to visit a friend, going to visit the sick, going to visit a scholar or a righteous man, or he's on a permissible journey, going to seek his livelihood, then for that person, if he does not have water, or if it would make him sick to use water, then he can perform tayammum for both the obligatory prayers and the nafilah prayers. Whereas if a person, he's saying here, if a person is on a disobedient journey, like he's going to seek the haram, or he's going to do the makruh, the disliked, then he does not perform tayammum. But he does perform tayammum for the obligatory prayers. The infirm, the sick, may also perform tayammum for both obligatory obligations and nafilah prayers. If a person's sick, then he would do tayammum for the obligatory prayers, and then also nafilah prayers independent of obligatory prayers. So if a person is sick and he's not doing wudu, he can, if he goes into a masjid and he wants to pray the tahiyyatul masjid, the greeting prayer of the mosque, then he can do tayammum specifically for that nafilah prayer. Or if it's duha time, the mid-morning prayer, and he wants to perform it, or if it's tarawih, any of the non-obligatory prayers, he can do tayammum specifically for that prayer. So for the traveler who's on a permissible journey, who's not disobedient, and he's doing wudu because he cannot find water or water would make him sick, then he may perform tayammum for obligatory prayers and for non-obligatory prayers or nafilah prayers. A healthy person who is not on any journey is permitted to perform tayammum should he be fearful of losing the proper prayer time if he delays the prayer in order to do the wudu. So for a healthy person who's doing tayammum because he does not have water, then he can do tayammum only for the obligatory prayers. He cannot do tayammum for a non-obligatory prayers, specifically for that non-obligatory prayer. He may do it for an obligatory prayer and then pray a sunnah prayer after it with that same tayammum, but he cannot do a tayammum specifically for a sunnah prayer, just as the traveler or the sick person would do so. And he could also do tayammum if he's fearful of losing the prayer time. So because the prayer time, according to the Maliki scholars, is given precedence over the purification. If a person does not have water, and he knows that by looking for water, or by doing a ghusl, or by doing wudu, he's going to lose the prayer time, then he would do tayammum and perform the prayer in its proper time, rather than delaying it and perform the prayer with wudu outside of the prayer time. So according to the dominant opinion of the Maliki scholars, the prayer time is given precedence over the purification of wudu or ghusl, so he would go to tayammum. So if a person, say for example, wakes up at the end of the night and he needs to do a ghusl or even just wudu, and he does not have enough time, he knows the sun is about to rise, then he would leave the ghusl or leave the wudu and he would do tayammum so that he could pray in the prayer time. But the healthy resident is not permitted to perform tayammum for nafilah prayers, Friday congregational prayers, nor the funeral prayer unless it was an obligation upon him to perform it. So this healthy resident who is not doing wudu, he's doing tayammum because he cannot find water. It is not permitted for him to perform tayammum specifically for nafilah prayers, nor for the Friday, for the Jum'ah prayers, or for the funeral prayer, the janazah, unless it was an obligation. So for the Friday prayer, the healthy resident does not do tayammum for it if he cannot find water, unless he knows that the entire time of dhuhr is going to pass and he won't find any water. So for him, he goes ahead and prays Jum'ah with tayammum. Whereas if Jum'ah time comes, and he does not have water now, but he knows that later in the time of Dhuhr he will find water, he leaves praying Jum'ah with tayammum and delays until he can pray Dhuhr with wudu. Also, he does not pray a funeral prayer unless it's an obligation. So the funeral prayer is a collective obligation, fard kifaya, if other people are fulfilling that obligation. But if nobody else fulfills it, nobody else is praying upon that dead person, and now this healthy resident who's only doing tayammum, if he's the only person that can pray, it now becomes an individual obligation, a fard ayn upon him to pray upon this person. So now he would do tayammum specifically for that fard prayer. Now, two things that the author does not go into detail here are when a person would do tayammum, and that's either for fear of sickness or for lack of water. So for fear of sickness, a person would do tayammum because of one of three things. Either he fears that using water would cause him to become sick, would increase his already present sickness, or would delay the healing of his present sickness. So if he fears one of those three things, then he can go from wudu or ghusl to performing tayammum, doing the purification through the dry earth. The way he would know this, it can't be that he just thinks that he's going to get sick or he has a light feeling that he'll get sick. He has to know either through prior experience or a doctor told him not to do this. The doctor said, I know that if you use water in this, if you use water, it's going to cause you to get sick, it's going to increase your wound, or whatever it may be. So in that case, if he knows he's done wudu in that instance before, when he had this similar sickness and it increased it, he had just a runny nose, then he did wudu, and it caused him to have a bad flu, then he would do tayammum. So if he fears sickness, he fears increasing the already present sickness, or delaying the healing, and he knows this either through prior experience or through a knowledgeable doctor who told him not to do wudu, then he can do tayammum. The other situation would be where he does not have any water. But before jumping to tayammum, he has to analyze his situation. If he thinks that he can go and buy water, he has to go and buy water, as long as the price is not very high. If he thinks that he can go and he can ask his neighbors or people in his surrounding area for water, he would have to do that. He would have to go and seek out a way to get water and travel in his radius. Make sure that he can go, what they say, about the radius of about 1.5 miles of his area to find water. So it's not that he does not, just because he doesn't have water at that specific time, he jumps to tayammum. Or he can go and buy water, or he can ask for it and somebody will give it to him, or he can borrow it from somebody and promise to pay him back. Then he has to do that before jumping to tayammum. The other thing that this text does not go into is if a person has just a wound on a certain portion of the body. If he has, say, just a cut on a certain area of the body, then he doesn't say, well, if I wash this wound, it's going to increase it, and so I'm going to do tayammum. What he does is he looks at that wound. If he can wash the area around the wound and then merely wipe over the wound, then he would not skip the wudu and then go to tayammum. He would complete his wudu and just wash the area around the wound and then lightly wipe over that wound. If he thinks that even wiping over the wound will cause it to become worse or delay the healing, then he puts something over the wound like a bandage, and then he wipes over the bandage. If he knows that even that would harm him, then in that situation, then he could go to tayammum. وفرائض التيمم النية والصعيد الطاهر ومسح الوجه ومسح اليدين إلى الكوعين وضربة الأرض الأولى والفور ودخول الوقت واتصاله بالصلاة. This is the section on the obligations of tayammum. The obligations of tayammum are an intention. So he has to have an intention when doing this tayammum that he's not unlike in wudu, he doesn't have the choice of one of the three things to make the intention. He can only make the intention of one of two things: either permitting the impermissible, or the obligation. But he would not intend the removal of the hadath, because tayammum does not remove the state of impurity from this person. It merely allows this person to perform this act of worship when he does not have water, or he fears the use of water. The use of water would cause him harm. So he makes one of those two intentions, either that this tayammum is an obligation, or that he's permitting the impermissible. Permitting the impermissible, like praying without wudu, is haram, so he wants to make it permissible by doing tayammum. The second is al-Sa'id al-Tahir, pure surface of the earth. And pure surface of the earth, he's going to mention what would be included in this, and he's going to mention things such as dirt and earth, sand, rock, and so forth. وَمَسْحُ الْوَجْهِ, also wiping the face. Just as it was defined in wudu, the face, here in tayammum, that area, the face would be wiped after touching the pure earth. And then wiping the hands up to and including the wrists, that is an obligation. And then also wiping in between the fingers. Then also continuity in the action, that he does not leave a space of time in between the wiping of the face and the wiping of the hands. And then also entrance of the obligatory prayers time. So the tayammum, if it's going to be done, can only be done after the prayers time has actually entered. If he does it before the prayer time has entered, it is not a valid tayammum. Also, that it is connected to the prayer without interruption. That he does the prayer, that he does the tayammum, and then shortly thereafter he performs the prayer. Whereas if he does the tayammum and then a long time passes before he prays, he has to repeat the tayammum. وَالصَّعِيدُ هو التراب والطوب والحجر والثلج والخضخاض ونحو ذلك ولا يجوز بالجص المطبوخ والحصير والخشب والحشيش ونحوه ورخص للمريض في حائط الحجر والطوب إن لم يجد مناولا غيره. The earth's surface, or the sa'id, includes dirt, things such as dirt, adobe, which is unbaked mud brick, stone, snow, if he's not able to melt the snow and use the water for wudu, because that it would be too cold and it would harm him, or he doesn't have the means to melt it, then he does tayammum on the snow. Marsh, which is like the khadkhad, just it's not water and it's not hard earth, it's muddy, it's mud. So he would do tayammum. He could do tayammum with that, and things like that. So things that are constituents of the earth, things that are part of the earth, he could do tayammum on them. It is not permitted with baked plaster, so things that are taken from the earth, but they go through a change. It's not permissible to do tayammum upon that, like plaster. So gypsum, if it's taken from the earth, in its natural state, it can be tayammum can be performed upon it. But once it's been cooked and changed, now tayammum can no longer be performed on it. Similar things such as cement, or other things that go through a process that changes their makeup, so it's no longer permissible to perform tayammum on them. Grass mats, even though that's from the earth, it's not permissible to do tayammum on it, because it has to be something a part of the earth, a constituent of the earth. Wood is also not permissible to do tayammum on, or foliage such as grass. It is permitted for a sick person to use stone or adobe wall of a house, with the condition that they cannot find anyone to bring something more acceptable, such as a stone. So if a person is in a house and he's doing tayammum, and the walls of his house are made of unbaked mud brick or stone, then he can do tayammum on that wall. And he's saying here it's only permissible if he cannot find somebody to bring him something. But the dominant opinion is that he can do tayammum upon the wall, whether or not he can find somebody to bring him something else, and even if he's not sick. As long as the wall is made of stone and there's nothing covering it, like paint or a sealant, or it's made from unbaked clay, then he can do, both the sick and the healthy person can do tayammum upon that. Whereas if a wall is made out of drywall, or it's painted, or made from cement, it is not permissible to perform tayammum upon that. وسننه, the sunan of tayammum are تجديد الصعيد ليديه ومسح ما بين الكوعين والمرفقين والترتيب, striking the earth a second time for the wiping of the hands. So the obligatory was touching the earth once, or the stone, and then wiping the face, and then he could actually use that first contact with the earth to wipe his hands, but it's sunnah for him to make contact with the earth again a second time for the wiping of the hands. وَمَسْحُ مَا بَيْنَ الْكُوعَيْنِ وَالْمِرْفَقَيْنِ. Also, it's sunnah to wipe the two arms from the wrist up to and including the elbows. So we said wiping the hands up to and including the wrist is an obligation. From the wrists up to and including the elbows is a sunnah. There are some opinions that it's an obligation to wipe up to and including the arms, but according to the Maliki madhab, you wipe. The obligation is to wipe up to and including the wrists, and then it would be sunnah to complete the wipe up to and including the elbows. Also, following the given sequence. So in the Quran, it says wipe your face. When doing tayammum, wipe your face and then your arms. So to do the face first and then the arms is considered a sunnah. وفضائله, the virtuous acts of tayammum are التسمية وتقديم اليمنى على اليسرى وتقديم ظاهر الذراع على باطنه ومقدمه على مؤخره. The virtuous acts are saying Bismillah. So at the first contact with the earth, a person would say Bismillah. That's recommended. Then proceeding with the right side, then the left, just as in wudu, you would do the right arm first and then the left. Then wiping the outer portion of the arm first, prior to the inner portion of the arm, and then wiping the arm beginning with the tips of the fingers to the elbows. So this the wiping of the outer arm prior to the inner arm, and then wiping the arm beginning with the tips of the fingers to the elbows is what's called wasfun hamid. So that's where he would wipe beginning with the tips of the fingers, start with his left hand, wiping his right arm, the outer portion all the way down to his elbow, come around and then wipe the bottom portion of his arm up to the tips of his fingers from the bottom portion of his hand. And then use the bottom portion of his hand to wipe the fingers. So the entire tayammum would be that he begins by saying Bismillah at the first contact of the earth, then he wipes his face, making sure to get under the nose, and then wiping over any facial hair. And then a second contact with the earth, and then he does the wasfun hamid. He would take the bottom of his left hand to the tips of his right fingers on the outer portion of his right hand, and then wipe it all the way down to the elbow, then go around the elbow and now wipe from the inner portion of his arm, from the elbow up to the tips of the fingers, and then he would kind of clasp each finger individually and wipe it, so that he's wiping the inner portion of his fingers of his right hand with the bottom of his left hand. So he would not interlace them like he did in wudu, because the insides of the fingers of the left hand did not touch the ground. So if he were to do that, he's touching the inside of his right fingers with the inside of his left fingers, and the inside of the left fingers did not touch the ground. So for that reason, he would clasp each finger of his right hand with his left hand and then wipe them individually, so that the insides of the right finger are being touched with something that was that made contact with the ground. And then he does the same for the left arm. He would take the bottom of his right hand to the tips of his left hand on the back portion of the hand, wipe all the way down to the elbow, come around the inside portion of the arm up to the fingers, and then wipe the inside of the fingers with the bottom of the right hand. نواقض التيمم. ونواقضه كالوضوء ولا تصلى فريضتان بتيمم واحد، ومن تيمم لفريضة جاز له النوافل بعدها ومس المصحف والطواف والتلاوة إن نوى ذلك واتصلت بالصلاة ولم يخرج الوقت، وجاز بتيمم النافلة كل ما ذكر إلا الفريضة. The same things which nullify wudu nullify tayammum, everything that was mentioned in the section of those things which nullify wudu, if they were to happen, they nullify the tayammum. With the addition of one thing, which is finding water before going into the prayer. So if a person does tayammum, and then before beginning the prayer, somebody comes and says, here's some water, or he sees water that he didn't know about, then his prayer is the tayammum is invalid, and he has to do wudu. Whereas if he's now entered into this prayer, and then after he is entered in, somebody brings him the water, his prayer is correct, he completes it, because he went into it in a valid state. Moreover, one cannot pray 2 obligatory prayers with 1 tayammum. So each tayammum, you can only pray 1 fard prayer with it, 1 obligatory prayer. If a person, for whatever reason, is praying 2 prayers together, like in certain situations when a person is traveling, they join the 2 prayers, Dhuhr and Asr, and then Maghrib and Isha, he would have to, and he's doing tayammum for either fear of sickness or for lack of water, then he would do 1 tayammum for the first prayer, the first obligatory prayer, and then do a second tayammum once he's done with the first one, and then he performs the second one. So he could not perform 2 obligatory prayers with 1 tayammum. Although one may pray nafilah after the obligatory prayers with the same tayammum used in the obligatory prayer. If a person did an obligatory prayer and did tayammum for that, after he has completed that obligatory prayer, if he wants to pray nafilah prayers after that, he can do so. So the sunnahs after dhuhr, or after maghrib, or after isha, he can do that with the same tayammum that he used for the obligatory prayers. He does not have to do a new tayammum. So if a person wants to pray the tarawih prayer, and he's doing tayammum for whatever reason, he would do tayammum for the isha prayer, and then he would stand up and then pray the tarawih. The person can also use the same tayammum for touching the copy of the Quran, circumambulation, tawaf, and recitation if he had intended that. It followed immediately after the prayer, and the time of the prayer has not expired. So if a person wants to do something that requires wudu, then if he has done tayammum and prayed the prayer, he can do that thing after the prayer with that tayammum. So reciting the Quran requires a person to have done a complete ghusl after janaba. Or doing tawaf requires wudu. Touching the mushaf requires wudu. So all these things that require wudu or require ghusl, if a person has done tayammum, has a right to do tayammum, and he does it and he prays, then he can do those things after that prayer, as long as he does it immediately after the prayer. So immediately after the prayer, he picks up the mushaf and he reads from it. He does not have wudu, but he did tayammum for that obligatory prayer. He does tawaf, circumambulation of the Kaaba. He can do that right after the prayer, using that same tayammum that he had prayed that obligatory prayer with. Or the recitation of Quran, because this person who's in a state of janaba, he's doing tayammum, and then after the prayer, he recites Quran. Because normally, for the person in a state of janaba, it's not permissible for him to recite Quran. But this person, because he did tayammum for an obligatory prayer, after it, it's permissible for him to recite Quran. He says here, though, that one of the conditions is that he had intended that at the time of tayammum, he intended that not only is he going to do this obligatory prayer, but he's actually also going to do that other act of worship after the prayer. Imam al-Akhdari has mentioned this, but according to the dominant opinion of the madhab, that is not a condition. So even if he did not make that intention, he can still do those things after the obligatory prayer is finished. Another condition is that the time of the prayer has not expired. So he can keep doing that thing as long as the time of that prayer has not expired. So after Asr, he touches the mushaf, and he keeps doing it. He can do so as long as Maghrib has not come in. ومن صلى العشاء بتيمم قام للشفع والوتر بعدها من غير تأخير ومن تيمم من جنابة فلا بد من نيتها. Should one perform Isha prayer with tayammum, then in order to do the even and odd night prayer, the shafa' and the witr, it must be done immediately after the obligatory prayer without delay. So he can do the tayammum for the obligatory prayer, which in this case is the Isha, and then the prayer which is after it, the nafil of the shafa' and the sunnah of the witr, he can do it with that same tayammum. He does not have to do another one, as long as he does it immediately after and does not delay it. And a delay would mean something like the amount of time that he can have between the end of the obligatory prayer and the starting of that other act is the time it would take to say the Subhanallah 33, the Alhamdulillah 33, and Allahu Akbar 33. If he delays it more than that time, then he can no longer use that same tayammum for this act. He says also, Rahimullah, Imam al-Akhdari says, should one do tayammum in a state of major ritual impurity, janaba, he must intend tayammum for that purpose. So if a person is doing tayammum because of janaba, he's in a state of major ritual impurity, and he's doing tayammum because he cannot find water, he fears sickness, or he fears that the time of the prayer will go out, then when he does the tayammum, not only does he have to have the intention of making permissible the impermissible, or the obligation of tayammum, but he also has to make present the intention that he's doing this tayammum from a state of janaba. This next section is the chapter concerning menstruation. Faslun fil hayd. This chapter is not only a necessity for every single Muslim woman to learn, but it's also incumbent for many men to learn. Because in the case of a woman, it's clear. She has to know these rules because she experiences these things. And for a man, he most of the time, every man will have a sister, will have a mother, a daughter, a wife, some woman around him that it will be incumbent upon him to teach her. So he has to know these rules so that he can teach her these rules. Because it is incumbent upon every man to teach his wife, to teach his daughters, and to teach his sisters, to teach them their fard ayn, to teach them the rules that they need to know so that they can properly worship Allah. And also for a man with his wife, he needs to know to follow her menstrual cycle, because there are certain things, certain times when they cannot have normal husband-wife relationships. And even if the man is married to a non-Muslim woman, a Jew or a Christian woman, he has to know these rules, because even for her, after she completes her menstrual cycle, she has to do a complete body wash before he can have relations with her. So he has to follow the menstrual cycle for her so that he can tell her when she's considered by Sharia menstruating and when she's not. The other reason that it's important to learn these rules is because Sharia has a definition for the hayd, for the menstruation, and the post-childbirth bleeding of a woman, regardless of what the doctors say. So we might find that a gynecologist considers hayd something hayd, but the Sharia does not consider it hayd. And we might see that the gynecologist considers something that not hayd, and the Sharia does consider it hayd. So a person has to know the Sharia rulings regarding the rules of hayd. Women fall into three categories: وَالنِّسَاءُ مُبْتَدَأَةٌ وَمُعْتَادَةٌ وَحَامِلٌ. A woman who's experiencing hayd or menstrual blood for the first time, a woman who's an experienced woman, meaning that she has had a previous cycle so that she can judge what is her normal cycle, even if that previous cycle was only one time. So the mubtada'a is the woman that is experiencing her menstrual cycle for the first time. She has a specific hukum, and she will only use that hukum for the first time she's menstruating. The second time she menstruates, now she's considered an experienced woman because she uses her previous and first menstrual cycle to judge as her normal cycle. And then the pregnant woman. Since during pregnancy, according to the Maliki scholars, the blood that a woman experiences is considered hayd, and they know that during pregnancy the blood would be abnormally long, they have a specific hukum for her. وأكثر الحيض للمبتدأة 15 يوما وللمعتادة عادتها فإن تمادى بها الدم زادت 3 أيام ما لم تجاوز 15 يوما. The longest menstrual cycle of a woman on her first period is 15 days. This is the hukum for the mubtada'a, for the woman on her first period. If she bleeds a few days and then the blood cuts off, then the matter is clear. She does a ghusl, and now it becomes incumbent upon her to pray and to fast and so forth. Now she's reached an age of taklif, reached an age of responsibility. If however, the blood keeps going, she does not have a normal cycle to see what how many days it would normally be. This is the first time. So if the blood keeps coming and does not cut off, then we do not say she's a menstruating woman as long as the blood is there. The Sharia has given a definite term, and that's 15 days. For 15 days, as long as the blood is there, she considers herself to be menstruating. After 15 days, if the blood does not cut off, then she would consider that this is no longer hayd. She would do a ghusl and then go on to praying, and she would consider any blood that she experiences after that to be istihada blood. And so she is now mustahada. She is no longer in hayd. She is now in what the Sharia would consider a sickness. وَلِلْمُعْتَادَةِ عَادَتُهَا. For an experienced woman, the longest menstrual cycle that the longest thing she considers to be a menstrual cycle would be according to her normal period and then adding 3 days. Should the bleeding continue past her normal cycle, as long as it does not exceed 15 days also. So for the woman that has a normal period, a normal cycle, if the blood comes and reaches the amount of that normal cycle and then cuts off, the matter is clear. If, however, the blood keeps coming, what she does is she adds 3 days to her largest normal cycle, and then after that, if the blood is still there, she considers herself to be no longer in hayd, no longer in menstruation. So for example, if a woman's normal cycle sometimes is 5 days, sometimes is 6 days, sometimes is 7 days, and now the blood has come 5 days, it's on its 5th day, on its 6th day, on its 7th day, and on the 8th day it's still coming. So what she does is she takes her largest normal cycle, which in this example would be 7 days, adds 3 days to the 7 days, making 10 days. So after 10 days of bleeding, she no longer considers this blood to be menstrual blood. Then on the next month, if the blood were to continue abnormally long, she would add 3 days to the 10, making it 13. And then on the next month, if it keeps going, she would add 2 to the 12, because she cannot exceed 15 days considering herself a menstruating woman. If her longest normal cycle is, say, 12 days, she would add 3, making it 15. If her largest normal cycle is 2 weeks, 14 days, she wouldn't add 3 and make it 17. She would only add 1, going to 15. Because the longest a woman can be considered in a state of menstruation, a state of hayd, is 15 days. وللحامل بعد 3 أشهر 15 يوما ونحوها وبعد 6 أشهر و20 ونحوها. As for a pregnant woman, if bleeding occurs after 3 months, then it should not exceed 20 days. As for a pregnant woman, if it's after 3 months, and in Arabic it says بعد 3 أشهر, and what it means is بعد الدخول في الشهر الثالث, after entering into her 3rd month. So after entering in, not after the completion of the 3 months, but after entering into her 3rd month of pregnancy, if she experiences blood, then the longest, she does not go to her normal cycle. What she does is she considers herself to be in a state of menstruation until 20 days. If bleeding goes past 20 days, then she does not consider herself to be in a menstruation. Should it occur after 6 months, then it should not exceed 25 to 30 days. If she experiences bleeding after entering into her 6th month of pregnancy, then the bleeding, if it goes past 25 days, or some scholars say 30 days, then after that, on the 26th day, she would do a ghusl, and even if the blood is there, is no longer, she does not consider it to be menstrual blood, she considers it to be istihada blood. فإن تقطع الدم لفقت أيامه حتى تكمل عادتها. If the blood flows intermittently, then she should add up the number of days in which there is flow until she completes her normal cycle. If a woman experiences a normal hayd, she will experience it for a certain number of days and then it will cut off. And during those days, the blood will remain there. If during the course of her period, the blood flows intermittently, it comes one day and then it stops one day, it comes 2 days and then it stops, then she adds up those days. She adds up the days together until she reaches her normal cycle. or whatever category she is, she goes until the most of that category. So if she's a first-time woman experiencing her first menstrual cycle, then she would keep adding the days together until but she would not go past 15 days. The experienced woman would keep adding the days together until she goes 3 days past her normal cycle, and then she would no longer consider it hayd. And then for the pregnant woman, she would either go 20 days if she experienced it after the entrance into her third month of pregnancy, or 25 to 30 days if she was in her 6th month of pregnancy. ولا يحل للحائض صلاة ولا صوم ولا طواف ولا مس مصحف. It is not lawful for a menstruating woman to perform prayer, fasting, circumambulation, touch a copy of the Quran. So for a menstruating woman, she cannot pray. It's haram for her to do so. It's haram for her to fast. If the menstruating blood started after she began fasting, then her fast is broken, and she should not complete it. She should also not start any new fasts. Also circumambulation. It's not permissible for her to do tawaf around the Kaaba, or to touch a copy of the Quran. She cannot touch a copy of the Quran, a mushaf, if it's merely the Arabic. Whereas if it's, say, a tafsir of the Quran, that would be permissible for her. ولا دخول مسجد. It's also not permissible for her to enter a masjid. وعليها قضاء الصوم دون الصلاة وقراءتها جائزة. Moreover, she must make up the days of fasting missed, but not the prayers missed during her cycle. It is permissible for her to recite Quran from memory during her cycle. So she must make up the days of fasting during her cycle. If she missed any of the days of Ramadan during her cycle, she has to make those up, but she does not have to make the prayers that she missed during her cycle. وَقِرَاءَتُهَا جَائِزَةٌ. It is permissible for her to recite Quran from memory during her cycle. According to the Maliki scholars, for the woman in a state of menstruation, she can recite Quran from memory. ولا يحل لزوجها فرجها ولا ما بين سرتها وركبتها حتى تغتسل. Her private parts are unlawful for her husband during this time, and this includes what is between the navel and the knees until she performs a ghusl. So everything between the navel and the knees for the husband to derive pleasure from that, whether it's through intercourse or other means, touching is not permissible for a husband with his wife during the menstrual cycle. And when it says that he cannot derive pleasure from what is between her navel and her knees, this is direct contact to her skin. Whereas if he's deriving pleasure from what's between her navel and her knees, if it's from above clothing, then that would be permissible. And so he cannot derive pleasure or have intercourse with her until she performs a ghusl. So even after the blood stops, it's not permissible for him to derive pleasure from that area until she performs a ghusl. فصل في النفاس. This is the chapter on lachial bleeding, and it's the bleeding that occurs after a woman gives birth. والنفاس كالحيض في منعه وأكثره 60 يوما. Lachial blood, or post-childbirth bleeding, is the same as menstrual blood concerning what is not lawful. So all the things that were mentioned that are prohibited for the menstruating woman to do, and for her husband to derive pleasure from that area during the bleeding, the same goes for during the time when she's experiencing post-childbirth bleeding. The longest period of bleeding is 60 days. If the bleeding after the childbirth occurs at a certain number of days and then cuts off, the matter is clear. But if the blood keeps going, the longest that she would consider herself to be in a state of lachial bleeding is 60 days. After that, she would perform a ghusl and go about her normal routine of worship, and she would not pay attention to the istihada blood, in that it does not require her to do a ghusl, but she would, if just like in the wudu, it would break her, just like in the nifas, that istihada blood, the blood that's coming after the normal period, would break the wudu, unless it's coming a lot, so much that it would create a hardship for her to do wudu. فإن انقطع الدم قبلها ولو في يوم الولادة اغتسلت وصلت. If the blood ceases flowing during that time, even if on the same day as the birth, then she should perform ghusl and begin to pray. So just like in the case of the nifas, the woman in hayd, in menstruation, when as soon as the blood stops, she performs a ghusl, even if it's on the day of the birth. And also, if a woman has given birth and does not experience any postpartum bleeding, then she would still have to perform a ghusl, because the mere childbirth requires a ghusl. فإن عاودها الدم فإن كان بينهما 15 يوما فأكثر كان الثاني حيضا وإلا ضم إلى الأول وكان من تمام النفاس. Should the flow of blood resume, then if it had stopped for longer than 15 days, it should be considered menstrual blood, and if less than that, she should add it up to the previous days and consider it part of the 60 days until they are complete. So say this woman during her nifas bleeding, it's coming and it's going. It's not coming consecutively. There's a few days where she experiences bleeding and then it stops and then she bleeds again. So what she would do was she would add up all the days until she reached 60 days. And this is if between the blood there's not 15 days of consecutive purity. Whereas if the blood stops for a few days and then comes back and then stops for a period of 15 days, she goes 15 complete days without experiencing any blood, then if she experienced blood, the next blood she experiences is considered a new menstrual cycle. She goes back to the rules of a menstruating woman. In her case, whether it's she would go to her normal cycle, and then and so on. So if it comes before 15 days, say the blood stops and then comes after 10 days, then she would consider that as part of the nifas bleeding. For both the woman in nifas, the postpartum bleeding, and also the woman experiencing menstrual blood, if the blood comes, even if it's one drop, she considers that entire day to be considered a day of menstruation. So when we say 7 days, it could, and it's usually 7 days of continuous bleeding with minor interruption. But if it comes, even if it's one drop, she considers this entire day to be one of the days of her cycle. If the blood comes and then stops, so she considers that on her tally to be one of the days of her menstrual cycle or one of the days of her nifas bleeding. But then immediately she would do a ghusl and pray and continue praying until the blood comes back again. So in theory, a woman could be praying and be fasting her entire the course of her menstruation. An example of that would be she experiences blood for an hour or two at night. It cuts off. Before the Fajr, she makes her intention to fast, and then she fasts, and she prays all those prayers after having done a ghusl. And then the next night it comes back, and so every day she would consider that entire day to be one of the days of menstruation, but she would be fasting and praying during those times. If the blood ceases, and she knows that it's going to come back during the time of the prayer, then she does not have to do a ghusl and pray. But if she knows that the blood is not going to come back until after that prayer time is over, then she would do a ghusl and pray at that time. Also, for a woman that does not, if she feels that the blood is constantly flowing, then she does not have to check it. But if she does not know whether their blood is there, she should be checking every single prayer time to see that if the blood has stopped, then she should make a ghusl and then perform the prayer of the prayer of that time. The times that she would not have to check to see if she had stopped bleeding is after she has gone to sleep and before Fajr. So she should not wake up at the end of the night to see whether the menstrual blood has stopped, so that she can pray Maghrib and Isha. She should just continue sleeping until Subh, but she should wake up in the morning time to see if the blood has stopped. If it has stopped, then she does a ghusl and she prays the Subh prayer, the morning prayer. فصل في الأوقات. This is the chapter on the times of prayer, and the majority of Muslims do not know how to tell the prayer, the times of the prayer, the way the Prophet ﷺ did, the way he was taught by Jibreel alayhi salam. In the hadith that's mentioned in Muwatta, the Prophet ﷺ said that Jibreel came down and taught him how to pray. He showed him the times of the prayer, and then he passed that on to the Sahaba. And this knowledge has been passed down and is still preserved by a certain portion of the Muslim community, but the majority of people have left this, either because of leaving the prayer totally and not fulfilling its conditions, or because of relying on such things as prayer time schedules. And so a person, the average Muslim, does not know how to tell the prayer without using a watch or without using a time schedule. And the Prophet ﷺ never used a time schedule, or there weren't watches at that time. So they used the sun and the moon and the stars to be able to tell the prayer times. And there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says that the best of the most beloved servants of Allah, to Allah, the most beloved servants to Him, are the people that watch the natural signs to follow the prayer times, watching the movement of the sun and the stars and the moon to follow the prayer times. So it's important for every single Muslim to know this, and it's a simple science for him to know the prayer times, so that he can see the creation of Allah, and also so that he can know the prayer times without relying on a watch or a time schedule. Because some of the times those schedules are incorrect, so he should go back to the origin, the original thing, the sunnah way of telling the times of the prayer. الوقت المختار للظهر من زوال الشمس إلى آخر القامة والمختار للعصر من القامة إلى الاصفرار. The elective time of Dhuhr is from the sun's inclination away from the center of the sky until the length of the shadow at the zenith plus the shadow of an object. So the author, rahimahullah, begins out by giving the time, the definition for the time of Dhuhr. And he has done this just like many of the scholars have began by mentioning, when mentioning the times of the prayers, they begin by mentioning Dhuhr because it was the first prayer that was the first obligatory prayer that was prayed in Islam. And for that reason it was given the name Dhuhr, because Dhuhr comes from a word meaning dhahara, to appear. So it was given the name Dhuhr because it was the first obligatory prayer prayed in Islam. The Waqt al-Mukhtar, each prayer time has an elective time and then a necessary time. The elective time is a time that the prayer has to be that it has to be prayed in it, and it cannot be delayed to the daruri. And then the daruri time is a time that in the normal situations a person could not delay the prayer to that time, but in times of necessity he could delay the prayer to that, such as in travel, or if a woman's in a state of nifas or hayd, they could be delaying the prayer to that. The elective time of Dhuhr is from the sun's inclination away from the center of the sky until the length of the shadow at the zenith plus the shadow of an object. So when the sun rises in the morning, if you look at the shadow of an object, or if you stand up and you look at your own shadow, you'll see that it will be pointed out towards the west, and it will be very long. As the sun rises in the sky, the shadow will be decreasing and moving towards the north, pointing towards the north. At the middle of the day, at the zenith, the shadow will be pointing due north. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it'll be pointing due north, and for a certain period of time, the shadow will neither increase or decrease. So for the time that the sun was rising, the shadow of all objects were decreasing, gradually decreasing until it hits the zenith. Then no noticeable decrease or increase can be noticed. After a certain time, and that will depend on the place that a person's in and the time of year, there will be a noticeable increase. That noticeable increase is the time of Dhuhr. So we have a few terms. When the shadow is at that zenith time, when it's no longer increasing or decreasing, that's known as the istiwa period. The istiwa, when the shadow is neither decreasing or increasing. As soon as it moves, there's a definite increase, a noticeable increase, that's called the zawal. Because the zawal literally means something that's been removed, and it's moved away from the center of the sky. So the shadow now moves and increases. Once you see a definite increase, then you know that the time of Dhuhr has entered, and its time goes until the length of an object at the length of the length of the shadow at the zenith plus the shadow of an object. So whatever object you were looking at, if you were looking at your own shadow and you were measuring it out, or say you were using a stick a stick that was the length of a meter. So we said this stick was a meter, and when we measured it at the istiwa period, at the time when there was no movement, the shadow was not moving, we noticed that the length of the shadow was 2 meters. So the length of the object is 1 meter, and the length of the shadow at the istiwa is 2 meters. And then at two, once we see a noticeable increase. So we know that at the time of Dhuhr, the length of the shadow of this object was 2 meters and a little bit. So then we add the length of this object, which is 1 meter, to the 2 meters of that shadow, thus getting 3 meters. So when we see that the shadow of this object is 3 meters and a little bit, we know that the mukhtar time, the elective time of Dhuhr, is out. If a person is using their self to measure the shadow, the fuqaha have mentioned that every single person's body is equal, his height is equal to 7 of his feet. And it's also equal to 4 of his arm lengths, using from the tip of the thumb to the elbow, the dhira'. So if you know that, since you know that your height is equal to 7 of your feet, then when you check your shadow, if you say at the time of the entering of Dhuhr, we say that we count out the shadow and we find that it's 3 feet long. So what you would do is you would face the shadow, look down at the ground, see where the top of your head is, and mark it on a point. Either have somebody put something there, or just mark it with a stone or a stick that's on the ground there, and then start taking steps to count out your shadow. Walk in a straight way until you get to that point to count your shadow. Your first step where you're standing, you're not going to count it. The first step that you take is 1 and then 2. So say you mark out your shadow and you find that the time of your at the time of Dhuhr, it's 2 of your feet. So you see that when Dhuhr is entering, you notice that there's a clear increase in the shadow. So your shadow was 2 feet. So in that example, say you were measuring it at the istiwa period, at the period when there was no increase or decrease in the shadow, and you were noticing that it was about 2 feet but a little bit less. Then you noticed a definite increase, and so you saw your shadow was now 2 feet long. So you know that Dhuhr is entered, and it has entered when the length of the object, which is yourself, was 2 feet long. The length of the shadow of the object was 2 feet long. So that's the time of Dhuhr, and then it goes until the length of the object plus that shadow. So we add 7, which is your height, to that 2, getting 9. So when you count out your shadow and you find that it's 9 feet, you know now that the time of Dhuhr is out, and the time of the elective time of Dhuhr is out, and the mukhtar time of Asr has entered. So that's what it means when it says the elective time of Asr is from the length of what is measured plus the shadow at the time of the inclination until the time of the yellowing. So the length of what is measured, which in the case of using yourself would be 7 feet, plus the shadow of the time of inclination, which is the zawal period. So in that previous example, we said it was 2 feet. So the elective time of Asr is from that. 7 feet plus 2 feet equals 9 feet. So when your shadow would be 9 feet at your, in this example, the time of Asr has entered, and it goes until the yellowing period, which is called the isfirar. And to have a more definite calculation for the end of the mukhtar time for Asr, you would just add another 7 feet to the time of Asr. So if we said it, Dhuhr is coming in at 2 feet, we add 7 feet to get the time of Asr, so Asr is coming in at 9 feet, and then we add another 7, which is 16 feet, so we know that the mukhtar time of Asr will end when the shadow of this person or any person is 16 feet long. And if he was using a pole that we said, like in the first example, which was a meter, and we said that Dhuhr is coming in when the shadow of that object is 2 meters, then Asr would be coming in when the shadow of that object is 3 meters, and the mukhtar of the Asr would be out when we measure the shadow of that object to be 4 meters. Now these are just 2 examples, and the calculations are going to change drastically based on the place that a person's in and the time of year. So sometimes the time of Dhuhr will actually have no shadow. So you know that Dhuhr enters when you actually see the presence of a shadow to the object. Sometimes the shadow will be 13 feet long at the beginning of Dhuhr, like in the times of winter and in the northern latitudes. So a person has to be following this regularly to know it. And so every single person should follow it, and then they'll have a greater appreciation for the creation of Allah, and they'll notice that how the shadow is changing. A lot of people that don't do this, they don't even know where the sun rises and where it sets, other than they've heard that it rises in the east, but they're not watching it and they're not watching the shadow. And that's one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't they see how their Lord has stretched the shadow? So to watch the shadow is actually an act of worship. The absolute necessary time for both, meaning the Dhuhr and the Asr, is the end of the elective time of Maghrib, of Asr, until the actual sunset. So at that time it becomes the Daruri time, and it's prohibited to delay the prayer to the Daruri unless there's an excuse. So Dhuhr goes from the Zawal until the shadow is equal to the length of the object plus the Zawal shadow, and then the Mukhtar of Asr begins and the Daruri of Dhuhr begins. And then it goes until we add another length of the object, and then the Mukhtar, the elected time of Asr, ends and its Daruri begins. So at the end of the elective time of Asr, you have the beginning of, you have the Daruri of both Dhuhr and Asr until the sunset. Then وَالْمُخْتَارُ لِلْمَغْرِبِ قَدْرُ مَا تُصَلَّى فِيهِ بَعْدَ شُرُوطِهَا. The absolute necessary time for the elective time for Maghrib, or the Mukhtar time for Maghrib, is the time it takes to pray it once the conditions have been fulfilled. So once we establish that the sun has completely set, not only that the sun has began setting behind the horizon, but now it's completely set. So if we're on the ocean or in a plain where you can actually see the setting of the sun, you would wait and you would look to the west and actually wait until you have, the sun has completely gone down, and then you know that Maghrib has begun. If you can't see that because there's mountains between you and the area where the sun sets, then you look to the east. And you wait until you see a grayness in the sky coming, which indicates that night is there. And it's a sign that the sun has definitely set. So if you cannot see the actual sunset, then look to the east, and when you see that graying area, that gray is no longer the light blue of the sky, it's now kind of a fuzzy gray, then you would know that Maghrib has entered. Once Maghrib has entered, the elective time, the Mukhtar, is a relatively short time, and is defined as the time it takes to pray it once its conditions have been fulfilled. So we would look at how long it takes to perform a wudu or a ghusl for somebody that needs it, to find clean clothes, to find a clean place to pray, to figure out which direction is qibla, and then to actually perform the prayer. The time it would take to pray the prayer after fulfilling all those conditions, that's the time of the Mukhtar of Maghrib. وَالْمُخْتَارُ لِلْعِشَاءِ مِنْ مَغِيبِ الشَّفَقِ إِلَى ثُلُثِ اللَّيْلِ الْأَوَّلِ وَضَرُورِيُّهُمَا إِلَى طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ. The elective time or Mukhtar of Isha is from the time of the redness of the sunset subsides until the first third of the night. So after the sun sets, there's still a redness, which is called in Arabic shafaq. It still is in the sky. So Maghrib is in, even though there's still some redness left in the sky. And after the Mukhtar of Maghrib, it becomes the Daruri of Maghrib. And when that redness is completely out of the sky, then the Mukhtar time of Isha has begun. And it goes until 1/3 of the night. So from the time that the redness subsides until the first third of the night, that's the Mukhtar of Isha. The way that we figure out the first third of the night is to take the time of Maghrib and the time of Fajr, the time of the entering of dawn, and then we divide that by 3, and then we know the thirds of the night. So if Maghrib, say, is at 6 o'clock and dawn is at 6 o'clock, we have a 12-hour night. 1/3 of that would be 4 hours. So we add 4 to 6, getting 10 o'clock. So we know that the first third of the night ends at 10 o'clock. So Isha would be from the time the redness subsides until 10 o'clock. And again, depending on the time and the place of the person, the shafaq could set quickly, within an hour after sunset, and sometimes it takes a few hours for it to set. But once it's set, you have the time from the redness going out of the sky until the first third of the night, And then after that, it becomes the daruri, the necessary time of Isha until the Fajr, until the dawn. So after the Mukhtar of Maghrib, it's daruri all the way up to Fajr. And after the Mukhtar of Isha, it's daruri all the way up to Fajr. والمختار للصبح من الفجر إلى الإسفار الأعلى وضروريه إلى طلوع الشمس. The elective time or mukhtar of Fajr, of Subuh, of the morning prayer, is from the first true light of dawn, the Fajr as-Sadiq, until the dawn's light has completely pervaded the location and faces are discernible. So, in certain areas you have what is a false dawn and a true dawn. The false dawn usually happens in northern latitudes during the winter period, and it's that light comes up in the eastern horizon, and it comes up very quickly, and it looks like the letter Lam, L, and the Lam in Arabic. It comes up very quickly and then it subsides very quickly. So if a person's watching the Fajr, they would not pray when that false dawn comes up, but they would wait until the true dawn, the Fajr as-Sadiq, comes in, and it comes in slowly, and then it stretches from far from the south to the north, and then it comes in. So once the dawn has been, you're sure that the dawn is in, that's the beginning of the Fajr time, and it goes until the Isfar. And the Isfar is when that there's enough light that you can clearly discern faces. If there's no artificial light and you're not inside a building, and now you can see the face and you can discern the face of the person next to you, then you know that the Mukhtar time of Fajr is over, and now the Daruri time, the necessary time, is in. And this necessary time goes until the sun begins to rise. والقضاء في الجميع ما وراء ذلك ومن أخر الصلاة حتى خرج وقتها فعليه ذنب عظيم إلا أن يكون ناسيا أو نائما. Any prayer missed is made up any time after the respective times of election and necessity have passed. So in this section we have defined the times of necessity, daruri, and the times of the elective times, the mukhtar times. Both of those times are considered adat times, meaning that if the prayer was performed in one of those two times, it's considered a prayer performed in its time. It's adat. If it's performed outside of those two times, then it's considered qada. And whether a prayer was missed intentionally or unintentionally, it has to be made up regardless of why it was missed. ومن أخر الصلاة حتى خرج وقتها فعليه ذنب عظيم. Anyone who delays a prayer until the time has passed completely has done an enormous and grave wrong, with the exception of someone who overslept or completely forgot. So if a person let the prayer totally go out, went from the adat time to the qada time, or even went from the mukhtar time to the daruri time without a valid excuse, then he has committed a grave and enormous wrong, a kabira, unless he overslept because the pin was lifted from the person that's sleeping, or he just completely forgot. He was doing something and he was totally heedless he forgot about the prayer, and then the time went out. So the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ has been excused for forgetfulness or mistakes, unknowing mistakes that they made. So if a person overslept, he's not. He definitely has to make up that prayer. And the same goes for the person who overlooked it, who forgot about it. And he should make sure in the future to try to have somebody wake him up, or to put an alarm clock or do something to wake him up. And he should try to get in a state where he doesn't become heedless of the prayer. He becomes very conscious of the prayer. Now, if a person goes to sleep before the time comes in, like if he goes to sleep at night and the time comes in, he went to sleep before it came in, so it's not there's no sin upon him for not waking up. So if a person's around him, the person should wake them up, but it's not wajib, it is not incumbent to wake up a person that's sleeping for them to pray. There is an opinion that it is wajib, so it would be best to go ahead and wake them up. But one should know that it's not incumbent to wake a sleeping person up for prayer. It is very recommended according to the dominant opinion, though. If a person went to sleep, and that's if he went to sleep before the prayer time actually came in. Whereas if he went to sleep, once the prayer time has come in, he went to sleep, and he knows that he's going to sleep through the entire length of this prayer time, then when he goes back to sleep, his missing the prayer is considered a sin. So if he went to sleep before the prayer time and missed the entire length of the prayer time, he's not taken into account for that, although he has to make it up. Whereas if he went to sleep after the prayer time had already come in, then he is taken into account for that. He has to make it up, and he has to do repentance for delaying the prayer. ولا تصلى نافلة بعد صلاة الصبح إلى ارتفاع الشمس وبعد صلاة العصر إلى صلاة المغرب وبعد طلوع الفجر إلا الورد لنائم عنه وعند جلوس إمام الجمعة على المنبر وبعد الجمعة حتى يخرج من المسجد. Nafila is not prayed after the morning prayer until the sun rises. So once a person prays the subh prayer, the morning prayer, he should not do any nafila until the sun rises in the sky and the time of duha comes in. So not only has the sun risen above the horizon, but it's risen up above the horizon, and now it's lost the orange tint that it had when it first rose, and it has this bright white, which is the duha time. So from the time a person finishes praying the subh prayer until the duha time, it's makruh to pray nafila, except during the actual time of the rising of the sun, which at that time it's haram to pray. Likewise, no nafila prayer is performed after Asr until the sun sets. So after a person prays Asr, then it is makruh, disliked to pray nafila until a person prays Maghrib. So from that time until they pray Maghrib, except for the time that the sun is actually setting, in which case it is haram to pray a nafila. So in the times of the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, it's haram to pray nafila. But if a person is in a state where he delayed an obligatory prayer until that time, then he should go ahead and pray it. There's no sin in praying during the times of setting and the rising of the sun. Nor should night prayers be performed after the dawn light, unless someone who normally prays them in the night misses them. So if a person has a wird, a normal prayer routine that they do every night, a certain set of rak'ahs that they do for tahajjud, they should be performing them before the dawn comes in. If the dawn has already come in, then it is makruh to pray, unless a person normally does it and he overslept. So he can go ahead and pray his normal routine of prayers, and then he prays the Fajr Raghiba, the 2 rak'ahs of sunnah before the subh prayer, and then he prays the subh. No nafila prayer is prayed at the Friday prayer once the imam is seated upon the dais, upon the minbar, until he actually leaves the masjid. So if a person enters into the Jum'ah prayer, he can pray nafila unless the imam has now began walking towards the minbar. Once he begins walking towards the minbar, it becomes haram to begin any nafila. And once he's seated on the minbar, there's no nafila prayed until he completes the Jum'ah. So it's haram once the imam begins walking towards the minbar to begin a nafila prayer. Even if a person has come into the masjid, he should not pray the greeting masjid, and so he should just sit down. And that's according to the understanding of Imam Malik, whereas Imam Shafi'i considers that for the tahiyyatul masjid during Jum'ah, even if the khatib is on the minbar, that he goes ahead and pray it. But for those following the Maliki madhab, they would not pray the tahiyyatul masjid once the imam is on the minbar. And he would not pray until the imam actually leaves the masjid. So from the time the imam walks towards the minbar, it becomes haram to pray nafila. During the prayer and during the khutbah, it's haram to pray. After the imam says assalamu alaikum from the prayer, it's disliked, makruh, to pray nafila until he actually leaves the masjid. فصل في شروط الصلاة. Section on the conditions of the prayer. وشروط الصلاة طهارة الحدث وطهارة الخبث من البدن والثوب والمكان وستر العورة واستقبال القبلة وترك الكلام وترك الأفعال الكثيرة. The conditions of the prayer are 6. 1. Ritual purity from events that remove a state of purity or hadath. So a person has to have removed the hadath, either the lesser hadath, which is removed through wudu, or the greater hadath, which is removed through ghusl. So that is the first condition of the prayer. The person has to be in a state of wudu, and he has to have completed a ghusl if he needs it. And if he can't do those, that he has to have done tayammum. And then purity from filth, the khabath or the najasa from one's body, clothes, or place of prayer. So removal of the khabath from those three things. From the body, anything that he's wearing, the clothes, anything, his body, anything that he's wearing, the clothes, or the place of prayer, and that's the place that he actually touches while he is praying. Also, one of the conditions of the prayer is covering one's nakedness, and he will define what is the nakedness for a man and what is the nakedness for a woman during prayer. Then facing the direction of the qibla. So, and this is going to differ, of course, if a person's in east of the qibla, they're going to pray west. If they're west of the qibla, they're going to pray east. If they're south, they're going to pray north. If they're north, they're going to pray south. If they're northwest of the qibla, they're going to pray southeast. So they're just going to face the qibla depending on where they are. So the ulama have said that since facing the qibla is an obligation, then also knowing the way to find the qibla is also an obligation upon every single Muslim. So every single Muslim should have basic knowledge of the celestial signs to be able to find the qibla. In the Quran it says, وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. By the star they are guided. That they use the star to find the qibla. So for the people in the strongest qibla, the strongest proof for the qibla according to the madahibs, to all the madahibs, is the North Star. The North Star is a star that's part of the Little Dipper. And it does not move. All the other stars, if you watch them, they rise in the east and they set in the west, except for the North Star, it never moves. And depending on how far you are, if you're in more northern latitude, it's going to be higher in the sky, but it will never move from its position. And if you're in a southern latitude, it's going to be closer towards the horizon, but it will never move. So you know if you're facing it, that it will be north. So the ulama have said that if you're east of the Kaaba, you put the North Star to your right ear, and now you're facing the Kaaba. If you're west of the Kaaba, put the North Star to your left side, and you'll be facing it, and so forth. So you use that once you know where the North Star is, you know where north is, and you know where you are in relation to the Kaaba, and then you can find your way. Another proof that they said that is used for the people of the West is looking for Orion's belt. Orion is one of the star signs that rises in the east, and when it rises, you can look at where Orion's belt rises over the east, and you know that's the direction of the Kaaba. The way you would find it using the sun is you would look for matla' al-i'tidal. Matla' al-i'tidal is the normal, is the place where the sun rises during the spring and the fall equinox. During the spring, around March 15th, and during the fall, because in the winter time, in the winter solstice, the sun's going to be rising in the southern towards the south, and it's going to be a very short day. So you take that position, you know where that is, and then you find out where the sun rises in the winter time, in the summertime, the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and then right in the middle is what is called the matla' al-i'tidal. You'll be facing the direction of qibla, and that's the direction where the sun will rise 2 times in the year, during the spring equinox and during the fall equinox.